Okay, part of the bookcase we're going to have a crown moulding and a nice skirting, and we'll be using hollows and rounds and a rebate plane to make those mouldings. First thing though, we've got to have a dead set straight edge. This is the crown moulding and this will be the skirting. First of all, I'll put a square straight edge on this one, then a square straight edge on this, and then put a 20-degree bevel on this one for the skirting. And then we'll get on to cutting the moulding. Once again, you can see the benefit of this long shooting board. When I've finished planing this piece, it will be straight. So you have to walk with the plane. All the way through. If I had to join these two pieces of wood together too, this is the way that I would do it. Remember, concentrating on holding your plane flat on the bench and just a little bit of weight down, or sorry, a little bit of weight in towards the piece of wood. So it stops cutting in a couple of spots, but we've got to keep going till it stops in all different spots. Right, and this will give me my reference edge for my moulding. Because mouldings aren't very successful unless you work from one edge and it's got to be straight. Right, put our skirting board in. When you're doing a skirting board, same deal, you've got to get that reference edge, because this is going to have a 20-degree bevel here, and the moulding will be done along that 20-degree bevel. Okay, just to make sure your shooting board is working correctly, put the square on it, check for square, looks good. Now, with the skirting board, we've got to put a 20-degree bevel, and I've picked, if you look, there's a few knots in this board, so we've got to deal with that. So I've picked the side with the least amount of knots, and my 20 degrees will come out to about there. I'll put my 20 degrees there, and I'll measure that. That's 24 millimetres that way, and 8 millimetres that way. So we'll do the exact same the other end, and we'll put one in the middle for good measure. Make sure we're keeping it straight. Simply plane to that line. And another good thing about a shooting board, if you're trying to put a bevel on it, it keeps you up away from the bench. So we'll just hang that slightly over the edge so we can angle our plane without interfering with the bench. So this time with the trying plane, we will set the blade quite deep so that this speeds this process up when you're taking that only a little narrow shaving. And as we get down to the flat part of the bevel at full width, then we will drop the blade depth back. Our angle's looking pretty good there. Getting fairly hard to push with this deep cut, so at this stage we might just drop that back a little bit as we get closer to the finished cut. And by dropping it back, I can see I'm getting a better finish on the wood. Right, now almost there, so I'm just going to back the plane off just that little bit to get the perfect finish. That's what we're looking for. Full width shaving, fairly fine, and no tear out around the knots. One thing I love about cedar, all those knots are like a beacon. You get the right light on them. As long as you haven't got tear out around the knots, it sort of lights up, particularly when you put your finish on it. But if you get tear out around your knots, it looks horrible. We've set up now to make the crown moulding for our bookcase. Now, when you're making a complicated moulding this size, I always do a drawing first, which I've got here. When you're using a round plane, you pick the centre point of where the round plane goes. For a hollow plane, you pick the outside edges there. So that's my next critical point. And that also ties in with a little rebate that I'm going to do. This one here, because we'll have formed this part first, we don't really need the second critical point, which is usually on the other outside edge, because the plane will run actually in that groove. And the last critical point is the centre of the other hollow that we're going to form. And what I do to make those two come together nicely, I fudge it that way. The centre line of the hollow there, I fudge it that way about 1/16 of an inch, and it just helps bring those two together. Technically that's the position, but from my experience with doing this, if you come that way a little bit, it makes it so much easier. After we've done the moulding, then I will put a 45 on both edges so that your moulding, crown moulding, will sit at 45 degrees in your main cabinet. And then we do a miter on the corner to go around the corner. But I don't do the miters first because it's a lot easier to mark out accurately from a square edge. So moving on from that, to set up our marking points, first of all we need snipe bill planes. For a hollow we form a little groove. For a round we just use the left-hand side on the left-hand side of the moulding to make your start point. We'll be using a 1 inch round plane, 1 inch hollow plane, a rebate plane to do this little part here, and the top section is a 3/4 inch round plane. Cutting gauge just to set out the joint. So first of all, take our ruler and mark in our key points. So 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 15/16. Right, set your cutting gauge. You can also use a marking gauge for this. And give yourself a nice deep line all the way along your board. I can't stress how important it is at this stage to mark out accurately. And by marking out with a cutting gauge, this is how you get all your profiles parallel. Alright, we start with a snipe bill, so we're forming a hollow. So you can take your left or your right hand. This has a brass sole which follows the line made by a cutting gauge. I put a little bit of wax on it so it doesn't bog down. Your first cut is critical. Keep your plane vertical so you don't run off your position. Then you can start to lean it out a little bit, which starts to form your V. Then take the other plane, keep it vertical so that it doesn't fall into that groove that you've made, because you don't want to move your lines one way or another. This one's not cutting quite deep enough. Right, now you can see we've opened out the groove nicely. Take my 3/4 inch shoulder plane, 3/4 inch round plane. Now I'll set the blade fairly deep to start with. So we can take off, we've got a fairly deep cut there to make. And then when we get close to finishing, we'll bring it back to a fine cut. So to start this plane, you just lay it on its side and put it in the groove that you formed. We'll go a little bit deeper than that yet. So in essence, what we're doing here is opening out the groove like that, and eventually the plane will just be able to stand up straight and run down the groove, forming the shape required. And when you're doing this, always making sure you're staying in the middle of your line. It's not, your plane's not diverting one way or another. As you can see, we've got a bit of reversing grain here. We'll accept a bit of tear out at this point in time. When we get close to the profile, then we'll back the blade off. It's always nice when you get the shavings coming off like that. Now you notice the shavings come out the right hand side of the plane. That's because the blade is skewed in this plane slightly to the right, which forces the shavings out. If I had a straight blade in this, the shavings will just curl up and catch in the throat. So that's why we go to the trouble of putting a 5-degree skew on the blade. Right, we're getting a full width shaving pretty much now. Right, now we're probably time to back it off a little bit. Don't forget to refer to your profile. We've still got a bit to go. So as a guide, I've made this up to practice and also to see whether there's any issues with this moulding. But you can see this part here, the sector is actually bigger than the sector of the plane. So we actually have to work it around like this. But it and it gives you a guide on how you're going. So we'll stay on our deep cut a little bit more to get down to depth. And we'll start working around the Right, we'll just drop back now. So I want to be able to get rid of this tear out. So adjusting these planes, thumb on the wedge and a light tap there. And also make sure that the plane blade is in the middle of the plane. which then matches the profile. So we'll give it a try at that. And down here, I'm reducing that tear out all the time. We're pretty damn close to being there. Next part we'll make is the quirk, or the edge of this round. So we'll sink down using the two snipe bills, a very sharp angle, and then start forming this part here. And we'll probably just start this one and help go down together. So it's back to the snipe bills. A little bit of wax on the soles. Your first run is critical, so just take your time to make sure it follows the cutting gauge line. Right, now we'll just give the rebate plane a little try in here. Make sure the blade's in the centre. Once again, these rebate planes are made with a 40-degree skew. Now if you look at it, we've got to run our plane at this sort of angle. Cutting very fine. So once again we'll go for a deep cut so we can get there quickly and then come back and take care of the tear out. When you're starting out doing moulding work, I wouldn't recommend starting on a large moulding like this. Practice on something short. Using smaller moulding planes is a better option. Then you learn all the tricks of the trade, which helps you then manage big mouldings like this. People have asked me why I don't make complete moulding planes. Well, I find I can make all the different variations of mouldings using hollows and rounds. If I was to make a big moulding plane to do this job, I'd probably only ever use it once, maybe twice. So hollows and rounds are very versatile and can do all the jobs that moulding planes can do. There may be some moulding planes, people, if they're going to use a certain profile a lot, that you might be worth chasing down, but you'd be better off chasing down an old one. Right, once we've opened that out enough, this plane will now run down . For me, making mouldings is the last bit of your job where you've done all the straight and square, done all your joinery, and you're just dressing up your cabinet now. That profile's coming up pretty nice. That's what I call enjoyment. And you can see with these shavings, your 40-degree skew at work really nicely for you. Once again, because of the size of this profile, we will have to work the plane around a little bit, because it's actually bigger than the segment of the plane. But we're working our way down there. So we're going pretty good with tear out around these little knots. There's just a little bit here and there with that quite thick shaving. So I'm quite confident that once I drop that blade back a bit, we'll get a perfect moulding without having to sand it. Right, we'll give the 1-inch hollow plane a run now. Same again, we'll set the blade quite coarse. I want my left-hand corner to run right along where the snipe bill ran. So even if you tilt it over and start to form this round bit first before you let it come into here. And I suspect we've got to go a little bit deeper on the round yet. So what will happen here is the hollow plane will start to cut into the round profile, and then we'll use the round plane to blend them together. So once I've got a full profile with this plane, then we'll correct the round, the hollow there with the round plane. Doesn't hurt to put a bit of wax or linseed oil on the soles of your planes. Those corners, if you were using hardwood, this cedar's not too bad. If you're using Australian hardwood, I'd be putting linseed oil on the sole of the plane quite regularly. Make sure you just don't wear those sharp corners away. They're important to this plane. And I'll tell you what, we're getting very close there. All of a sudden it'll all come together here. Right, it's time to change the depth of cut there now. By changing the depth of cut, we will eliminate any little bits of tear out which we're getting through in a couple of spots. Sight down the sole. You should see a black line where the blade is. Thumb on the wedge and a light tap there. And that retracts the blade. There was just a little awkward bit of grain reversing down there, so I came back the other way and that sorted that out. Your corners, when you have like these quirks, your best tool to clean them out is your snipe bill. So if they're presenting a problem with your round plane, just run your snipe bill along there and get rid of that. This last little bit you've just got to take your time. Blend things together. Right, that's pretty much complete in here. This rebate needs a little bit more work. That corner's going to be running right in the thing, in the bottom of the rebate, so you've got to make sure your blade is level with that side. Mouldings are all about the shadows that they cast, so they're generally sharp lines. This is why sanding mouldings isn't a good idea. You sand away sharp edges in mouldings and you can take away the whole look of the thing. When you're extending the arc of your moulding beyond your plane edges, usually the side of the plane will leave little marks. So do your extensions on either side and then run your plane down the middle to take away the little marks. If you have a look from the end, it really starts to show the profile.